My parents are both from New York. They moved here in the 70s. I was born here in 1984. Spent most of my life here. I lived in California for 2 years for college and Oahu for 6 years.
Gotcha. How'd your parents end up here?
My dad's a doctor, and there was like a 1 year position here that opened up at the hospital. So they came, me and my mom, kind of on an adventure. They were living in Guam before that, and Mexico actually before that. So they came saying, "Oh, maybe we'll live on this little island for a year and see how it goes." And they never left.
Holy cow!
Yeah,
that's is your father still around? Are your parents still around?
Both my parents are. Yeah,
they sound amazing. That'd be a good podcast interview. I mean, that takes such an adventurous spirit to be able to do that back then.
Yeah, they are amazing. I should say that, and yeah, I think they obviously had that adventurous spirit going from New York to Mexico and the tip of Maine for a while, and then Guam. So they were Yeah, I think.
Yeah, those are all very, very different places.
Yeah,
I spent some time in Maine last year and was blown away by it. It's beautiful.
I have actually never been. So.
Okay, you should go. It's a good it's a good vacation spot. Portland, Maine is where I was most amazed by. It was like this small shipping town, I think, originally, that has now become like this culinary mecca. So all these chefs out of New York and big cities on the East Coast or that area who can't afford to start a restaurant in New York, it's like they come out of these other important restaurants with all this training and they want to get into the business, but it costs a couple $1,000,000 to start a restaurant in New York, or you can go to Portland, Maine with $50,000. And so there's this tiny town, there's 400 restaurants in this downtown, and they're all super interesting. And now JFK is running flights out of New York to Maine, so people go for lunch or for dinner and come home the same day.
So my parents actually lived, now that you said Portland, they lived some ferry ride off of Portland on this little island.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
My mom, actually, my two older siblings were born on that island or born in Portland maybe, and they had to take a ferry. When my mom was in labor, I'm pretty sure they had to take this ferry to Portland.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy. Well, it really says something about Kauai if they've had that life experience and chose to stay on Kauai.
Yeah.
So what was it like growing up?
Mid-80s? Yeah, through the 80s. I have nothing to compare it to here, so I think I had a great childhood.
Yeah. How'd you spend your childhood?
Actually, I played a lot of computer games. So
really?
Yeah.
I thought this is where we started talking about paddling.
Yeah, no. I get teased a lot from my family, and like I would play a lot of games. I used to to avoid the glare on my computer when I was playing in the middle of the hot day. I'd put a blanket over myself in the computer, so I'd be playing as like a sixth grader just playing on the computer.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
What were you playing? Nintendo 64?
No, at that time was this online game, EverQuest, this role playing game. But no, I had Sega Genesis and PlayStation.
Yeah, I'm a couple years older than you, but similar era of gaming for me too.
Yeah.
So your father's physician. What did you study when you were getting into high school level, looking at college? What were you studying, and was your father interested in you pursuing the same career path, or?
No, there was, none. I have three older siblings, and none of us went into the medical field, and there was never a push for it. Sometimes I thought maybe I'll do pre-med when I go to college, but no. When we were in high school, me and my two best friends from Kauai, we were paddling canoe a lot, and we just had this real firm idea that we wanted to build our canoes for our life. So that was, my focus in going to college was really about trying to understand business and come back and be able to run a canoe manufacturing company.
So how'd you get introduced to canoes?
So my dad paddled growing up. I remember maybe when I was 9, I started paddling, and I was terrible and I hated it, so I quit. And then I went back when I was 12, and I kind of didn't really have a choice because my dad was, he'd paddle at 5 o'clock, 5 to 7:30, and he'd bring me home at night. So either I could just hang out at the canoe club, or I could start jumping into the canoe. So I ended up just paddling 5 days a week, kind of by necessity, with the kids program, and then going out with my the adult program when I was 13 years old, and spending a lot of time in the canoe. And it was, going from a kid who just played a ton of video games to spending my life in a canoe was an important transition for me to make.
What was appealing about it? I mean, so I grew up in Southern California, a little bit of 30 minutes away from the beach, but I spent a lot of time at the beach, but it was strictly in the shore break, body surfing, bodyboarding, and surfing. What about canoe? I would assume you had access to those things I just mentioned, but what about canoe?
You know, in the beginning, my very first practice, I remember when I kind of got back into it and I was 12 years old, and I went to the men's practice, and I like literally was vomiting halfway through the practice. I was just like, so, you know, kind of a chubby kid out of shape, had never excelled at any sports in my life. You know, I'd played soccer and tennis and stuff, and I was never very good at any of it. And even when I paddled, I started off pretty terrible. And then I think, you know, we had a coach that made it really fun for us. So practices were fun. And then just by the fact of just spending so much time in a canoe, all of a sudden when I was like, you know, 13 and 14, I realized, oh, you know, I'm starting to kind of do okay here. So for me, actually, you know, from the beginning was, I can do well in races. And I started to get really competitive as a young kid. You know, when I was 16 and 17, flying to Oahu and doing the racing scene up there. And at the time there was only like 3 or 4 juniors that were really racing OC1. And for me, I just liked being competitive and fast at a sport. And it was kind of not a great journey, because then I started paddling to do well in races, which is not necessarily healthy, I think, for anybody's sort of longevity in a sport or as a reason to do a sport. You know, so my, you know, after, you know, when I was 21, I was spending like 16 hours a week on the water. And it had lost kind of all of its fun for me, because I really was just going to try and win. And, you know, it felt like work. And I wake up at 4:30 in the morning to get on the water, like, oh, not again. So I ended up kind of having a falling out with paddling later on in my life, as like, oh no, I gotta kind of get away from this. And I have a much healthier relationship with it now.
We were just talking with Dave about the parallels between paddling and surfing, and that it is in fact surfing. If you open your definition of surf off of just standing on a shortboard, basically, the way a lot of people think of it. And that happens in surfing all the time, is people get into competitive surfing and it just becomes a different thing. You lose the essence of why it was beautiful in the first place.
Yeah, no, when we were kids, you know, it's so much fun just to like be in a 6-man with 5 of your friends, you know, and a lot of time we're fooling around in it. But you know, you do a downwind run at 15 years old in a 6-man or in a 1-man, and it's just, you know, it's, I don't even know how to describe it, but it's incredible, because you're just falling down these, you know, it could be like 30-foot faces of open ocean swell in the ocean. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. But it's definitely possible to get sucked into the competitive side of it.
Yeah, I suppose with anything.
Yeah, you know, and now for me, I took some years off, which I think we'll maybe get into it after I had an accident, and I you know, for so long I think I was like looking at it like I had to do well in races, and I had to do it kind of to, you know, push our company also. And then all of a sudden, you know, I kind of got taken out of the competitive scene totally. And I thought I would never go back into it. You know, I just thought, oh, here's a good excuse why, you know, I'm not going to paddle again, and I'm totally fine with that. You know, and then starting like, you know, 2 months after not paddling for a while, I was like, oh, I got to get back in a canoe. And then I slowly started getting in a canoe once a month or so. And all of a sudden realized, hey, I really enjoy doing this. And for me now, it's like, you know, I'm back to paddling maybe 5 times a week or so, and I just like love it. I wake up in the morning and all I want to do is get on the water. And we went from just paddling, and like, you know, my whole childhood was paddling the biggest ocean possible, right? Like the windier it was, the better it was, and we just do downwind winds constantly. And now I just like every morning paddle up and down the river. I don't go in the ocean unless it's for a race, and it's just beautiful. It's just like dead flat. I'm by myself. I go in the same river I've been in since I was 12 years old, and it's just like, you know, this morning, every morning is beautiful, but this morning you get to the end of the river and there's dew falling off the trees, and it's like you're in a forest and there's birds all around, and it's a totally different experience than the normal paddling experience. And for me, now that I'm doing it just because like I love to do it, or I get off the water and then I feel great for the rest of the day, and then I can't wait to paddle the next day, you know. And it's like finally after 20 years of this sort of love-hate relationship with the sport, you know, now I'm falling deeply in love again.
How long do you spend each morning on the water?
I live like 3 minutes from the canoe club, so I get down to the canoe club and I got like basically an hour from the time I leave the house to get back to the house. So I'm like, I just do like these 45-minute like little up and down the river kind of thing.
That's manageable.
Yeah.
So you talked about with your friends from high school. First of all, how's education here? How's public school education on Kauai?
So I went to a private school.
Oh, you did?
Island school until 8th grade, and then Kauai High, which is a public school here for high school. And, again, I don't really have anything to compare my high school experience to. I will say when I went to college, I went to Claremont McKenna College in California, and I was very unprepared for college. And basically all of their Hawaii kids all went to Punahou or Iolani, or one of the private schools, and they seem much better prepared. I can't necessarily blame that on my high school education, but yeah, it was definitely a struggle trying to get up to speed at college.
Gotcha. So you went to California for college, and then decided to come back to start the business in Oahu? Or?
So yeah, I went 2 years in California, and then we were kind of getting ready to start, and we knew we wanted to start the business. So I went back, transferred to UH.
Okay.
And mainly because it was way cheaper, and and I was able to kind of convince my parents that the money that they were putting into my college education, that instead, if I were to save the money and go to a cheaper school, UH at the time was $1,800 a semester, that I could put that money towards a business. So we kind of made a deal where I could get half of the savings that they were making from my cheaper college and put it towards the business. So then we were able to, have the incredible good fortune to, have some money to start a business with by the time we were seniors in college.
So the three of you decided that you wanted to start a canoe business. Mm-hmm. Why? What was the gap in the market? What were you going to fill, and how were you going to do it better?
When we were in high school, there wasn't necessarily a gap in the market. We just, we knew we liked to paddle, and we wanted to form our lives around the canoe. So it was, we would just sit at my friend's house before paddling practice. So we'd walk from Kauai to his house, and the canoe club was right next to his house. So we'd have an hour always to kill, and we'd be eating like a couple of noodles and talking about how we were going to build canoes. And we just did that like every day. And so, yeah, one of my, I went to school for business. My other business partner went for engineering, and the other one went to Honolulu Community College to composites manufacturing program. And then now, once we were at seniors in college, a friend of ours told us that there was an open space at this warehouse kind of near our house where we were living in Kailua. And so we literally rode our bikes up to this warehouse, looked at it for 2 minutes, and the landlord was like, "Oh, if you sign a lease right now, I'll give you 1 month free." We're like, "Oh, that sounds like a great deal." And we signed a lease at the moment, just not knowing anything about anything. And
crazy.
And signed a lease for this empty building, and we had no canoe design, we had nothing. And we figured it out.
That's insane. So how did you figure it out?
We partnered with somebody early on after we signed that lease, somebody who had an existing design and was having, some issues manufacturing it. So at the time when we kind of first started, there was basically, I'd say 70% of the canoes maybe were getting built in China, and there was a couple guys still kind of building out of their garage here in Hawaii. So we had this gap from, when we were in high school, we just wanted to build canoes. And then by the time 4 years later, when we were in college, all of a sudden in that 4-year period, Chinese manufacturing became a big thing and sucked up the whole market. So we knew then going into it that we were going to differentiate ourselves by building a locally built canoe, right? Our whole idea was we wanted to build canoes, not outsource canoes. So we found, there was a friend of ours who was sponsoring us at the time who was building out of his garage, and we partnered with him and started building his design. And then he, worked on a design with the company for a year, and we came out with what's the Pueo, which is our, still our most popular canoe in 2008.
At the time, did you understand the market forces that were at play and what challenges you might be up to? There's a reason why all those builders moved to China, right?
Yeah, no, we, we just thought, all these guys are going to China. That means there's an opening for Hawaii builders to make a name for themselves. And we were obviously really wrong. The reason everybody goes to China is because it's really hard or impossible to make money with composites manufacturing in Hawaii, right? It basically costs us somewhere around $4,800 to build a canoe, and we sell the canoe for $5,000, right? There's a non-existent margin.
Really?
And then when there's an issue, we've been struggling really hard for 11 years. Whereas if you're getting a canoe built in China, they're probably getting landed in Hawaii for, $2,200 or so, and sold for actually more than ours now. So,
what's the difference between the canoe that you guys build versus the one that lands from China?
I mean, the
in
big
terms
difference,
of performance and
the big difference, first off, in price is the cost of labor, and actually materials too in Hawaii is going to be, probably 10 times more for labor. But as far as performance, From the beginning, our canoes have always kind of had and this was with John Puakea, who was our partner before. We're no longer partners, but he, we had a kind of a rounder hull shape than most other canoes. And this, the idea was to make a much more all-around canoe, whereas at the time, and even still, most hulls were a lot more flat-bottomed, and the idea was that they could start planing in the surf. But for the most part, they would work really well in big downwind conditions, but they were pretty not that good in the rest, upwind or flat water. Whereas, in Hawaii, we all love to go downwind, but still 70% of your paddling is not going to be in big downwind conditions. And there's, races are often not downwind. So we kind of came out the Pueo, which was just much more all around. This rounder hull, might not plane as well in the surf, but it was much more efficient in all conditions. And so that's how we kind of, got a niche. And, by 2010 or 2011, probably, 60% of the canoes were our canoes in most of the races. And, and recently that number's come down just because there's a lot of good stuff coming out from elsewhere. So it's the market is sort of tightened up a bit.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, I mean, it's not unique to the canoe world that China is notorious for, stealing, quote, or borrowing IP and then just replicating something at a lesser cost. And so when I ask what's the difference between yours versus theirs, is there certainly a design you could break into the market with the design, but is there structural differences? Are they better quality end product? Do they last longer?
So to be honest, yeah, they're getting built in a sort of a composites hub in China, right? There's a lot of aerospace stuff going on around there. There's not a whole lot of composites going on in Hawaii. I think we're probably the biggest users of carbon fiber in Hawaii. And so those guys have access to pre-preg, at prices that we couldn't even come close to, right? Pre-preg is going to be pre-impregnated carbon and sort of at a perfect ratio for carbon to epoxy. And it's, and they have an autoclave up there so they can, their actual composites lamination is going to be pretty, their selling point is it's lighter and for the most part probably stronger than a Hawaii lamination. The selling point has always been though, there's like 20 steps in building a canoe. Each of those steps, something can go wrong at any step, and so we feel like our quality control, is going to be higher, mostly because everybody in our shop is paddlers, right? We know the customers, like everybody in the shop can see when the customer shows up at the door, and if one of those steps goes wrong, that person is out in that canoe, in 30 knot winds, far out from shore. And if something fails, right, their life is in our hands. So, we really pride ourselves on having really well-built canoes. And so aside from our inability to get pre-preg and our inability to put it in an autoclave, we feel like the rest of the product is going to, be more reliable. So
walk me through the basic construction. It's EPS foam.
So no, we have they're all molded. So we have foam core.
Gotcha. And they're hand laminated?
Everything's hand laminated. Yeah.
Crazy. What are the size of the canoes?
They're 20, 21 feet about.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's, if you look at like rowing sculls, right? I don't know much about crew or rowing, but those things sell for like $9,000 for a pretty comparable product. Whereas, we're selling for $5,100, and it's just, the market, our canoeing market can't handle much more than that. So right. For what goes into it and what we can sell it for, it's kind of impossible or really difficult, I think, to make it work in Hawaii.
Yeah.
And we've invested a lot in trying to automate what we can. We have a CNC machine, so we're doing a lot of our materials kits are sort of getting cut on the CNC machine. Our seats are getting cut on the CNC machine. All of our prototyping, we can do really rapid prototyping on the CNC machine, and that's one of the benefits of being in Hawaii is, right, the CNC machines right in our shop. My partner, who's the engineer and the brainchild behind all of it, can come up with a design and 3 days later be paddling this thing, right. Because of our CNC machine, really. And we have a pretty high temperature oven that my business partner built, and so we're able to slowly evolve. But it's really, if we were to try and bring in pre-preg carbon here, it's getting impregnated in California likely, and then it has to get shipped in a refrigerated cargo ship to get here, a container, and then we got to build a refrigeration system for it and build the proper oven for it. So like it just it's difficult to do it at that type of scale when nobody else in Hawaii is doing it.
Totally. A lot of this conversation, I wanted to talk about local, first of all, entrepreneurship, but local manufacturing and how that affects and stimulates local economy and all that sort of stuff. Why did you, being born and raised on Kauai, why did you decide to start that business on Oahu as opposed to Kauai?
So the idea was always to bring the company back here.
Oh, was it?
And we started on Oahu just because everything was there. Our fiberglass Hawaii is there, and our 80% of the Hawaii market is there, know, and there's just, if you run out of anything, basically, you can find it on Oahu. And we could find the warehouse space, right? There's a big open floor plan, 4,800 square foot warehouse, which is what we needed to do, we built a canoe a canoe a day. So we needed that type of space. But still the idea was once we get running, we're going to try and bring it back to Kauai. And we've always, tried, we've looked at a number of different warehouses here and it doesn't work for us for a number of different ways, right? One is that the supply isn't here. If we run out of something, fiberglass Hawaii is not, a 20-minute drive away. And also you just can't find 4,800 square foot open, warehouses here, as we were talking about a little bit earlier. That most of our industry here and our manufacturing is really catered towards like, high-end cabinetry or custom granite countertops, because our real industry here is like building resort houses and tourism. So it's all kind of catering to that. And there's just not much local manufacturing going on.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Being the owner of a local manufacturing canoe building company, it's certainly a bad thing, for us, we're in it because we like to build a product, right? And we believe it's important to have the ability to build outrigger canoes in Hawaii, right? And there was a dozen people building outrigger canoes before us, so we're not the first or the only guys to do this. But for the most part, most of those guys have packed up, and we're losing a lot of the knowledge, right? It took 20 years to be able to get a really good canoe built here. And there's basically two of us are still building OC1s in Hawaii, and the fear is that if we shut down and the one last other guy who's on his own kind of building one per week, if they shut down, then that knowledge is really lost. And the only people who can build this canoe is in China, and they don't have a connection to our sport. And it makes it just, I feel like, less resilient in so many ways when we lose our capacity to build things. And if you look at right now with the coronavirus, right, I don't know when this thing comes out, there might be total pandemic in the US with coronavirus. But at the moment, right, this thing is looking like it could be a big deal. And all of the face masks are coming out of China, right? So there's this sort of global face mask shortage, and there's no way for the US to sort of ramp up face mask production because we don't build it. We don't even have the ability to build these face masks, right? So it makes us just so much less resilient. That's obviously just one current example, but when we lose the ability to build these things, and we have an entire culture built off of more service industry or tech, without the ability to actually create a product, I think we're less resilient and we're losing something.
That argument makes a lot of sense for maintaining manufacturing in Hawaii at large, but why is there an importance on keeping some of that manufacturing in Kauai as opposed to Oahu? Because certainly from growing up here, part of me would think that you would want to keep Kauai pristine and just, I don't know, is there a value to having manufacturing in Kauai?
Yeah, right now our entire industry here is tourism, right? We are just completely reliant on the tourism industry, and it sucks the wind out of everything else. If I'm out there saying, hey, we need more manufacturing space and we need to build it in this old, what used to be agricultural land, it's like, no, tourists don't want to see a big factory making canoes. And it pushes out, so many different potential industries that, try and rise up. It's like, no, that doesn't work with the model of tourism. But we can't be entirely dependent on tourism. And what's happening now is that, on Kauai, I'm not going too far in the weeds here, but we have a tourism strategic plan on our island that says we have the capacity for 23 to 25,000 daily tourists here. And last year we were above that, every single month, and we're often at 33,000. And what happens when we go up to these numbers, tourists are spending less money per person, right? So our visitor spending isn't coming up more, and the island is just getting choked off, right? You just get stuck in traffic everywhere. You go to any of our beach parks, and you can't find anywhere to park. You can't put a towel out, right? We don't have the infrastructure ability to handle more tourism. And so it means we need to be able to push for alternative industries, and we really struggle as a company, and we cannot pay the wages that we wish that we could pay. So everybody who works for us struggles. We struggle as owners, but so not saying that we're the savior to our Hawaii economy, but we have a big problem here in that it's really difficult to afford to live on Kauai, right? If most of my friends from college, most of my friends from high school, of the ones who went to college, there's 2 or 3 of us who actually came back here, right? Just because you're going to take a job that makes a third of what you can make on the mainland, and you're going to pay twice as much for housing. And so again, not to say local community manufacturing is the solution to that, but definitely alternative industries outside of tourism. It's important for us to push against that, whirlpool of tourism that sucks everything into it, and try and get some alternative industries going. Right. And so some of that means, we need some more land for industrial space so we can cultivate local manufacturing.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. So you were manufacturing, obviously started the business on Oahu. What brought you back to Kauai? Because you live on Kauai now. So what brought you back?
So I was on Oahu for actually 6 years total, finishing out my UH, and then 4 years with the business over there. And then in 2010, I was racing in the Molokai Hoi, Molokai to Oahu canoe race, which is our biggest annual canoe race. And I jumped out of the escort boat to do the first change, and the escort ran me over. So the propeller went through my back 5 times and severed my pelvis and severed my gluteals and broke off 5 spinal processes. And
how does this happen, by the way? How do you get run over
by your own escort? It doesn't. Actually, it does happen. There's a propeller injury per year probably in Hawaii, and most of them result in death. So it actually does happen. But in my specific case, the rules have changed for the race. But back then in the race, it's a 9-person crew for a 6-person canoe. So you have 3 people who are in a motorboat who jump into the canoe. It's like a relay. So you're alternating as you go across the channel. And the race used to be, I believe it was at 30 minutes. So the race starts, and then at 30 minutes, they tell all the escorts, okay, find your canoe and do your change. So all the escorts had to stay far away, and then all these motorboats just go screaming around the race course right off, a Lau Point, which is this crazy rough point in the Molokai Channel. So ocean conditions are crazy. You get, 110 motorboats rushing around looking for their canoes, and the whole, strategy is to try and get your crew into the canoe as quickly as you can, right? If you get fresh guys in there quicker than the other guys, you can do better. So that first change is always chaotic, and it's always generally a short change. So like the canoe, you jump in the water when the canoe's 50 feet from you and bearing down on you. So we kind of did this quick change, and there was 2 canoes actually coming down, so the escort had to get out of the way. So as soon as I jumped in the water, I jumped in feet first, and he engaged the motor and turned, and the back of the boat just kind of fishtailed over me. So I felt, first I felt the hull hit my shoulders, and then I felt the propeller, ripping through my body. And then I remembered reaching around, and just there was like no back there. There was and I thought I was cut in half. The feeling sorry, and even every time I think about it, like sucks my breath away a little bit. But I was
going to say, do you have I would imagine PTSD just from thinking about it or feeling that. Yeah, that has to be so traumatizing.
I did some. Anybody out there who has PTSD, EMDR therapy, right? Yeah. I did that, and to get through it. I didn't have really bad PTSD. I just had I'd have dreams of getting eaten by polar bears underneath a motorboat. Just crazy dreams and just plane crashes. All these going from nothing to all of a sudden total chaos.
I've heard good things though about that EMDR.
Oh, it was amazing. Yeah,
really.
And it sounds so kind of hokey, right? It's the way that I did it. You just cross your fingers in front of your face slowly, and the idea is you follow the person's fingers back and forth, left and right, and the idea is to kind of massage the trauma out of your brain or from one hemisphere to the other. and reading about it, I was like, this can't work. But it's like, I think the number one therapy for people coming out of war zones and stuff. So I did it. And I walked away from the therapy thinking this didn't work. And then I just never had a nightmare again about it.
And it's a pretty short,
I spent maybe 2.5 hours or so doing it.
but just once?
Just one time. A lot of
That's
people do
what I mean,
lots of, I think people, do 3 or 4 or more times to, on harder trauma.
But it's a relatively short course of therapy.
Yeah.
When you think that other people go to talk therapy for years on end,
Yeah.
So you sustained a horrific injury.
So yeah, I had that injury, and in a number of ways, I was just crazy lucky with it. The deepest hit was through right above my butt, which is the one that severed my gluteals, and as like the surgeon said, like you can't get hit even close to that deep anywhere else in your body without like severing some organs, right? And the thing actually like hit my kidney or my liver, but didn't puncture it. So I was peeing blood for a while, but and then it crossed over my spine and exposed my spinal cord, but didn't actually hit the cord, right? If that even a fraction of a millimeter deeper, and it would have nicked the cord. So I remember being on the escort boat, and the guys are like, "Can you move your feet?" And I was like, "Yeah, I can move my feet." And they're like, "You sure?" And I was like, thinking, "Oh my God, am I not moving my feet here?" You have this idea of like people with phantom limbs, right? They think they can move it. And I was like, "I'm moving my feet," and then and then they're talking to me about like, "Oh, so tell me about your wedding," and I was like, "I've seen enough like war movies for the guys dying to like know what's going on here."
Yeah.
And then I heard them call. They were calling for the Coast Guard to get us, and they said on the thing he's not going to make it back to Haleolono. And then I ended up making it back to, all of a sudden, like we're in Haleolono. I can feel us as we get into the flatter water there, and I was like, oh, I guess we made it back to Haleolono. Anyway, so that accident didn't really change my life in so many ways. One, because I thought I was dying, and I remember just lying on the back of the fishing boat, sort of face down in my, watching my blood kind of go by my face. And I had this really intense sense of connection, which I've never felt like before or since. And I can't even explain it, but it was like this, it sounds hokey to say it always, but it was like this like tangible feeling of like, of love to my crew who was on the canoe, on the escort with me, then to my family and like just my friends. And it was just like waves like of love connecting me to everybody. And I remember just lying there being like, wow, this feeling like is incredible, and it feels so right that we're all connected. And like, here I am only figuring this out as I'm about to die, and I wasn't like scared. I was just sad that like, this is what life really is. And here I am like losing it. And then I never felt it ever again. So it's not like I walked out of there just feeling like waves of love connecting me to everybody else at all times. But I remember the feeling. Anyway, and then I ended up waking up from surgery on Maui, and my wife and my dad were there, and it was like, "You're gonna be okay." And I was like, and then I was on Maui for a while, and then in the hospital, and then I came home to Kauai to recover. And after I was home for 2 days, I emailed my business partners saying, "Hey guys, sorry, I'm not going to come back to Oahu, but I'll do everything that I can remotely from Kauai." And part of that was just like being back here, and I'd been gone from Kauai for 8 years or so, and I just felt like I could never leave again.
It became that clear in that short of a period of time.
Yeah,
just because of the one incident.
So, yeah, without a doubt.
Put everything into perspective.
Yeah, and it's always been, it was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done to tell my two business partners. I was kind of one of the ones really driving that we do this canoe company, and then to tell them, "Hey guys, I'm not going to actually be there to help build these canoes anymore." So that was in 2010, and it's been 10 years, I guess. So I've been, for a while I was doing kind of all the customer service and all the finances for the company, and I've sort of moved into more just sort of finance and a little bit of the customer service stuff. But yeah.
So we'll carry on that thread, but I want to go back real quick to that feeling of love that you said that you had, that spiritual kind of connection. I wonder, when did an episode, I don't know, do you know who Sal Masekela is? He's like a sports commentator, action sports commentator. And he had recently done this ayahuasca trip and talked about this interconnectedness And as we kind of talked through that, we kind of ultimately landed on the idea that it strips away a lot of ego and a lot of pride and a lot of these cynical things that we build in. This armor that we put on to get through regular life or to make business decisions or to, bed down the emotion. Because if you lived with that level of raw emotion every day, you really wouldn't be able to get through the day probably,
Yeah.
And so I wonder if that's kind of what that was, and you can induce it through maybe different methods. Like if you can strip away ego, if you can strip away pride, what is left? Yeah. And it's probably a lot of that.
Yeah.
No,
totally. And it felt sort of like, for this 45-minute duration of this boat ride that sort of I'd taken the shroud off and I could see.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
And, I never would talk about love or connection in any way before that, and then I came out of this just telling people like, oh my God, like I love you guys. And and it was, and again, after that, I've definitely felt, like I'm building back the armor, for me, I feel like every so often I can sort of get back into there. And I remember I woke up the next morning after the accident and I saw the sun rising over, it was either the West Maui Mountains or Haleakala, but it was from the window of my hotel room. And it was just like watching the sunrise, and it was like beautiful. And I'm in this quiet hotel room and my wife is sleeping on the couch, and it was kind of the first, I think, getting through my, the haze of all the, the whatever had put me to sleep for the surgery. And I was just like, oh my God, felt so connected to that again. And then so now every time I see, light when I'm paddling in the evening or the morning and I'm with friends, I'm like, oh my God, look at that light. And I'll just stop and sit there and just look at it, and so for me, I feel like the part that still kind of breaks me out of my own armor, I guess, is to see that type of light.
Yeah. And it's a small version of what you were experiencing.
Yeah.
But still, it was kind of the point that I wanted to get to is like, how do we live in that state of being more frequently? Yeah. And little moments like that through paddling or surfing or whatever help do it. I think that's probably why we're drawn to those things, the little spiritual connection to it.
Yeah. And, and for me, a big part of it is trying to sort of cultivate empathy in my own life. Right. I feel like when you have this sort of momentary deep sense of connection with everybody else, and then I think the way to carry that through into your daily routine is to try and be empathetic at all times. And I think maybe we'll get into it later, but as now an elected official and we live in this culture of outrage, especially from our elected officials, right? And I think when social media and everything's about kind of cultivating outrage, which is like the exact opposite of like what I feel like we need to be doing. And it's so tempting for me sometimes too, you get really mad about something or somebody, and it's so much harder to force yourself to love that person, like even they might believe entirely opposite of you. And it's like, but make the effort to break through the outrage and feel a sense of connection with that person. So for me, that's kind of in my own daily practice. And I totally fail a lot of times, but I at least try to do it.
Even setting the intention is a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and use that to segue. But as we do, can you also tell me about your wife's upbringing and how you guys met and why that's relevant to?
Yeah. My wife is actually a Cambodian refugee. She came to the U.S. She was actually born in a refugee camp in Thailand and then came to the U.S. and she was 1 year old and grew up in the projects in South Central L.A.
Did she come with her parents?
Yeah. So they when their first year, I think there was like 6 of them living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Echo Park or something in L.A. So yeah, she lived with her 5 siblings in South Central LA until she was 20 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
So she was too young to actually witness the horrors of the Cambodian genocide.
Yeah. She, so she was, born in the refugee camp. She wasn't there for the, Khmer Rouge and the killing fields, but she really lived it sort of through her parents in a way, and it's her story to tell, but there's a lot of, I think, intergenerational trauma that gets passed down.
I think so too.
When you're the child of a survivor of a Holocaust in any fashion. So we actually went back to Cambodia. It was her first time ever go to Cambodia in 2013. We went, and it was a really hard trip for her.
Did you have kids at that time?
No, that was before we had kids.
Okay.
Yeah.
So where did you meet?
She was doing because she couldn't get a passport. So her college did these like study abroad type things. So her study, abroad was going to Hawaii. Hawaii's not really abroad, but it was as far as she could go without a passport. So she was here for a couple of weeks, and my best friend went to school with her, went to college with her, and they I'm pretty sure just happened to bump into each other on the campus. He went to college with her. He was living with me for a semester, literally living in my closet, not a walk-in closet. He just he had a bed, just enough room for a little bed in the closet. He lived in my closet, and then happened to bump into her on campus. Was like, oh my God, what are you doing here? And then he didn't have a cell phone at the time. This was kind of before everybody had cell phones. He gave her my number, and then so she was calling me to hang out with him, and then we all just started hanging out.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So what was your heart for local government? What's your role, first of all, in local government, and then how did you get into it?
So I'm a member of the Kauai County Council. It's my first term here. I'm a year and a half into it. And it was, really, I think, started after my accident. I came back home, and the long story there is that I, in order, with this sense of connection that I feel like I had to sort of change the direction of my life in a way, and I had spent so much time paddling, and as we talked about in the beginning, the paddling was really, I think, driven by ego and to do well and doing the business, and the business was all about trying to ego also, and really for me, I mean, we did it because we wanted to do local manufacturing, but it's still driven by a desire to succeed in a way. And then I feel like after the accident, it kind of took all of that away, and then in a way I sort of wanted to start over, and we my wife and I built this yurt off grid, and in kind of in the rainforest in the wettest part of Kauai, and we just had this real commitment, or God bless my wife. It was me having this commitment, and she went along with it, but to try and live sustainably as much as we could, and the idea was to just be self-sufficient in every way possible. So we went, and this will come back to me running for office, I promise, at some point here. But we put in 6 solar panels and built a water catchment tank, and we're growing a lot of food. And you had to walk across or through we didn't have a bridge, so we'd walk through these 2 rivers to get to our house in the beginning. When we lived there for 8 years or so, and
before kids,
before my daughter was born there, she was there for a year and a half or so.
Because that complicates things.
Yeah. But it was also pretty early on. We felt great about it. I'd have friends come over, and I'd turn on the light, and I'd say, "Hey, look at this light! It's powered from the sun." But pretty early on, I realized that my solar panels, in the middle of the day, were just shunting power, right? So your batteries are fully stocked, and this power has got nowhere else to go. So the system literally just is getting rid of the excess load. And for me, I thought, that seems inefficient. And then I saw it's raining a lot, and our catchment tank is full, and then the thing just overflows. There's nowhere else for it to go. And I sort of started to have this realization that we put so much effort into building this, quote unquote, sustainable life off the grid. And in so many ways, it was so much less efficient than if we were on the grid, right? If I had been connected, that solar comes not just into my batteries and gets shunted in the middle of the day. It actually would go to my neighbors who need the power. And when we first went off the grid, our island's utility was at 10% renewable power. And then, now they're at 60 or 70%, and during the day was at this sort of exponential increase in renewable power coming on as we were off grid. And I realized, this is all happening, not because of me and my efforts at sustainability, but really despite me. I was almost making it harder by not being a member of the utility here for them to go in this sustainable direction. And for me, it sort of, started me down this path of wow, I'm trying to do this by kind of creating an island, and being self-sufficient, but that's totally not the answer. The answer is to we have to do this together. We can't do this by ourselves, and then I ended up, we just moved last year to Lihue, which is, a main sort of center of commerce on Kauai, the center of government. It's where most of the jobs are. And I went from this off-grid life where we couldn't park within like 1,000 feet of our car, walk through these rivers, to now I'm living in this older house in Lahui, and like in a lot of ways I'm more, my carbon footprint at least is smaller now than it was then, because I just never drive anymore, right? And it's sort of like the answer was like the oldest answer in the book, which is just like live close to where you work, and that's how to be more sustainable here and be part of the community, right? And now that I'm in Lahui and I've, neighbors, and we're, just you walk around saying hi to all your neighbors and helping neighbors when they have a problem, and have the time now, because I'm not driving all the time, to do more sort of community work, and started me down sort of this path of realizing, wow, we need to figure out how to do this together. And the other part of it was that, over those 7 years, I was doing some work on sort of boards and commissions, and then I served on our general plan. We have a general plan for Kauai, which is kind of the guiding policy document for our island. And the general plan sort of says the exact same thing as all of that, right? That we need to be able to sort of, instead of sprawling outwards and every person sort of on their own on a big agricultural lot, which is really inefficient from a land use perspective. It consumes all of our agricultural land. It makes for really expensive housing. Everybody's then stuck in traffic driving everywhere. That the answer is sort of, unique towns surrounded by open space, right? And we should be able to live close to where we work. And so that, as I'm coming through my own realization, I'm part of this general plan development process, which kind of says the same thing. And I just was like, oh my God, here is like this answer for us to like live sustainably. This is kind of the direction that we should be going in. And as I saw like all of my friends not able to move back home because they can't find a house to live in, and here is our general plan, which I think has the answers, which is like just make it really easier for people in town cores to add housing units and to, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna, then sort of next thing for me to do here is to run for office to try and make sure that this great general plan gets implemented. So that was my own journey in running for office.
It seems daunting. Like I wouldn't even know how to run for office. Obviously I'm sure I could research it and figure it out. The other detail is, I think it might be different in California than it is here, but I generally have a distrust of politicians, and it feels dirty. Like I don't even want to go play in the mud with those people. And I don't think I'm equipped to, unless my father was in it, I wouldn't even know how to really play that game. Did you feel like the local politicians were doing a good job at their job? Did it feel like a safe place to go and engage?
So one, I don't want to comment on like my opinion on other people doing their job, but I do feel like as I've been in it, there's like, it feels dirty. Often when I say I'm a politician, people, it's instead of it having sort of this aura of like public service, it has this aura of corruption in a way, or somebody who, like
the story in the news last week was insane.
Yeah. For me, now that I'm in it, I realize like there's no corruption that I've seen. At least, people are not being like bought off to make decisions. All of my colleagues up there are really like trying their best to make the best decisions they can, given their own sort of framework for the world, right? Given where they grew up and who their friends are and the different types of things they support, right? We might like disagree with each other, but they're certainly making what they think are the best decisions that they can make, and I'm doing the same, right? And so, I think, it's easy to sort of get sucked up into this thing, thinking this all thing's a big sham, right? These people don't work for me; they work for big corporations or whatever. But there's like at a local level, we have like none of that here, right? So you could have a huge business come in with all of this whatever money to throw around to politicians, and like that doesn't make an impact. Like what my friends tell me on what is their priorities is going to make the impact, and I think that's the same for all of my colleagues up there. And it obviously at a state and a federal level, the influence of money becomes bigger, and maybe you lose connection with your actual like community and your constituents. So it's going to change. But for me, like working at a local level has just been like has been great. I mean, there's so many, especially the civil servants and people who really work in government, like the subject matter professionals in our planning department and our roads division, our engineers and stuff, right? These people are all really good at their jobs. They're really passionate about the work that they do. And it's been really sort of enlightening and illuminating to be part of this world of passionate people who are trying to make a difference, right? And there's obviously government is dysfunctional in a lot of ways. It's hard to make sort of systemic change, but I think everybody is for the most part trying to push it in the right direction.
Good. Because when I hear you you just gave me your whole origin story for the last 40 minutes. I get it completely, and it sounds so authentic, and that's who I want to have making decisions in local government, is somebody who's doing it for the right reasons like you. And I do think that's largely what civil servants are, because you could, pursue any sort of lifestyle, and there's a lot of complication with this one, and probably not a lot of financial reward often, and so you'd have to do it from the bottom of your heart. However, when we see stories like we see in the news last week, it does paint it with that really ugly brush, and it feels like there's not a lot that we can do to get involved. So I'm glad to see that you can.
And also, of course, as in anything, there's going to be individuals who go down a bad path and make a series of bad decisions, right? But I think as a system, right, the at least at a local level, the system itself does function well, and it does respond to what the community wants.
What's your response been? I know you've only been in it a year and a half, but like, how's the community response been to you? There's that detail that we talked about early on where you're not actually Hawaiian. So is there a local contingent who is just going to be resistant to whatever policy you're trying to implement because you're not local Hawaiian? I've read, or Dave, I think, sent me some of the Civil Beat articles that you've written. And of course, there's always trolls. No matter what it is that you're writing about, as sincere and earnest as it can be, there's always going to be trolls who are going to take the opposite approach and try to argue some other detail. Has the local community supported you?
Yeah, I think, yes, the local community has. And I think there is certainly on Kauai sort of some sort of local haole tension, and it's easy to go down a path in public policy where you're inflaming that tension. There's kind of a famous story of somebody who was working on like a bill to like not allow for burning in backyards, and this like just blew up this thing like, well, we can't like have backyard barbecues or emus and like all this, when I don't know if that wasn't the intent, obviously, but that's how it got, and it created this big local haole divide, right? And I think there's policies like that which can sort of tend to inflame those same dynamics, and it's just important, I think, to be aware of it.
Yeah. Do you feel, or let's start with, what are the biggest issues that you feel are facing Kauai?
So it's, long-term issue is like number one for us is climate change, with sea level rise and impacts to the global economy and our reliance on tourism and all of this, the long-term impacts of sea level rise or of climate change for us are without a doubt going to be devastating. The state of Hawaii Department of Transportation has said something like 20% of our highways are at risk of flooding with 3 feet of sea level rise, which we're going to see over the next 50 years, and that there's no plan. Like it's just too expensive to really do anything about it. And you look at Waikiki, right? Waikiki's underwater at 3.5 feet of sea level rise. That road network. So again, this is a monumental problem without any real good solutions. And you look at what places have done with coastal flooding, and it's like buying back coastal property. And maybe you can do that in a region which is just like, here's our community which is set back, and there's a couple of these coastal properties which are at risk of flooding, and then the state can maybe buy those coastal properties out. But here in Hawaii, right, like we're a large percent of our population lives within range of 3.5 feet of sea level rise. So it's just not possible to buy out all these coastal properties. So part of it's just adaptation for us in sea level rise. There's no great answers here. And then the big challenge is, how do we transition to a zero carbon economy, right? Which we have to get there by 2050 or so. So that's going to be a monumental transformation. That's sort of long term. The most immediate crisis that we're facing right now is a housing crisis. The cost of housing on Kauai, you can't afford to live here. As I said earlier, right, most of my friends who went to college, they never came back. The people who have sort of committed to staying on Kauai, they're spending 30, 40, 50% of their income on housing. And it means that they've got to work 2 jobs to make it work, right? And everybody's just like, it impacts everybody all the way down. And the cost of housing in my lifetime has gone up by 345%. That's just like the increase in cost of existing houses. So really nobody can afford a house in my generation, and it's pushing us out. And then, I'd say those are the certainly the two biggest issues that we're facing.
How do you begin to solve the housing issue?
So that's part of what, as I was kind of referencing our general plan earlier and thinking, wow, this thing has a lot of the answers in there, right? So much of it is that we've made it really hard to build housing here. And so kind of the only new housing units that are getting built, 80% of our houses are built on agricultural land or really low density residential land far from our towns, right? So, and as we build only these houses, which tend to be sort of expensive houses because they're built on, a couple acre lot or something. And it's also driving our traffic problem because everybody then is commuting further and further to get to home to work. And we've made it really hard within our actual towns to add on housing, right? Whereas we have this sort of land use pattern in Hawaii built on plantation towns, and in all these old plantation style towns were all built sort of pre-automobile, or in the early days of the automobile last. So there are all these like just great walkable communities that are really built on like, mixed use, having residential space on top of commercial space, and everything's kind of within like a 15-minute radius. So we have sort of that backbone in all of our communities, but then we've made it really hard to sort of replicate that building pattern. So if you see any new communities that are built, one, it's really hard to do mixed use development. And then we have these huge, like, you got to put 2 parking stalls per X amount of square feet. So half the lot has to be parking stall. And we're really then copying sort of this suburban model from the mainland, which leads to just parking lot, communities. And so what our general plan does is try and recognizes pretty clearly, hey, we got to break this paradigm. We cannot continue to consume our agricultural land. One, we don't have enough agricultural land. 2, the houses are too expensive to build, and it's pushing everybody off, and it's causing all these traffic issues. So it's really about, one is making it a lot easier for people to build housing on their current lots, right? Additional dwelling units, what we call like ohana units here, or making it much easier to convert a portion of your existing house to like a rental unit or for your kids. We have this really, aging population here. So as we get, a couple, who's 70 years old and their kids don't live there anymore. And public policy makes it really hard for them to cut their house in half and try and rent out half of that to somebody else, right? We need to make it like as easy as possible for them to do that, or to build, a house in their, something in their backyard. And then also, recognizing that like in Lihue, which is like the job center for Kauai, we have 60% of the island's jobs and only 25% of the island's housing, right? So everybody commutes into and out of Lihue, and almost all of our traffic issues on the island are caused from that crazy imbalance, right? So it's just recognizing that we need lots more housing in Lihue, and part of that means higher densities. We got to go a little bit higher, and to ensure that at least people who want to like live close to where they work can find an affordable house close to where they work. So for me, that's the answer, and it's pushing back from, or at least just and giving people more options to build, basically. Without consuming our agricultural land.
You've been in it for a year and a half. Do you feel optimistic that politics can provide solutions to these problems?
Yeah, I mean, because the problem has been public policy, right? Because we make it so hard to build, right? The permitting process, the price of it, it can cost you $20,000 to try and put a kitchen in your unit. Right now we're sitting in this great sort of lanai with a bedroom on it, right? If they wanted to install a kitchen in here, they'd have to probably spend $20,000 or more, right? That shouldn't be how it is. So yes, because public policy is part of the problem, then I do think that public policy and local politics can be part of the solution.
But what I mean is, I'm sure other people prior to you have had that same exact thought and they haven't been able to rectify it via politics. Now that you're on the inside, is politics the answer?
I mean, one, I think it has to be the answer because a lot of these barriers aren't going to get eliminated anywhere else, right? If we're going to try and reduce the cost of housing, it means we need to reduce the barriers to building in a lot of ways. So these barriers have to come from the inside, and I think because of the size, if we were talking about this 5 years ago, there just wouldn't have been as much of a willingness to have this conversation because, hey, like if I live in a house, it's not necessarily in my best interest that my neighbor adds on a rental unit in his backyard, right? I don't want to see the extra car on the street or have, another family living in my neighborhood, maybe. And it also, when we're talking about ways to bring down the cost of housing by ensuring more housing units, right? It's against anybody's best interest to bring down their own cost of their housing, right? If you own a house on Kauai, you're making 5% a year just on increasing value of that house. So what I'm saying is that there's not a whole lot of, there wouldn't have been a whole lot of public support for policies meant to enable things that can bring down the cost of housing, right? There's a lot of, and you see this across the United States, right? Homeowners, for the most part, like exclusionary policies, like saying, no, I got my house, you can't build anything near me. I think now, because of the size of the crisis, because no young people can move here, because the people who are staying here are all crowding into one house with their family, right? Because it's so hard to find workers for anything. My own company, it's hard to find workers. The county has just tons of open positions because we can't find the workers because people can't afford to live here. I think that everybody recognizes the size of the crisis and is willing to sort of make these shifts that they wouldn't have made before as a public. So I think, 5 years ago, I introduced something to try and increase the density in Lihue. There would have been more pushback than there is, I think, at this moment.
Yeah. Community is the answer.
Yeah.
Yet again.
And
it's easy to see, or it's easier to see on a smaller island, The microcosm makes it a little bit more obvious.
Yeah.
The problems feel insurmountable on a giant landmass, basically.
Yeah. No, and I think also that's just recognizing, hey, we can solve this. I think for a long time you sort of hear like these are global issues. We can't solve this. But no, most of our population growth is natural born population growth. So it's not as if like we just have, yes, we certainly have lots of people who are coming here and buying up expensive houses. But for the most part, we don't have that like in our town cores within our actual communities. It's our own growth. So I think that recognizing that this is our own issue to try and solve, and that we have every tool that we need to solve it here. And then nobody else is going to do it for us, right? The state's not going to do it for us. The federal government's not going to do it for us. This is on us.
Yeah. Do you have any political ambitions beyond this? I mean, what is the long-term goal, or are you just taking it year by year?
Part of the reason I'm here is because I love public policy, and I'm also getting like a master's degree in public administration with a focus on public policy. And I love reading about housing policy and tax policy, and it's what I do with all of my time. And I think at a local level, you can make change much, much easier than you can at any other level, right? Like if I have no aspirations to go to Congress, but if I was in Congress, right, those people aren't like really writing legislation. Like it's mostly about communications and the symbolism of the fight at that level. Whereas at this level, it's all about trying to work with departments to create policy that changes people's lives, right? So it's like just problem solving, and it's incredibly rewarding. I've wrote and passed 10 bills or so this year, and it's just every single time you pass a bill, it's like it's incredibly rewarding to see the sort of fruits of your effort. So no, like right now, I'm so happy, and I feel so blessed and honored to be like in the position that I'm at where I can literally just, all day long try and figure out how to make people's lives better. Good.
Yeah, that's great. I want to bring it back to Kamanu Composites. A lot of what you said about it makes me feel like that business model isn't sustainable. Like you said, the labor market is challenging.
Yeah.
Pricing's challenging. Is there any export market for those canoes? Are they all sold in Hawaii? And the other detail, when I was asking about China versus locally made ones, with the surfboard industry, one thing that we can say is, look, or in California certainly, we're held to a higher EPA regulation, higher standard for employee care and safety and all that sort of stuff. So you can feel good about spending the money on the California-made surfboard, knowing there's a fair wage being paid. Everything is disposed of properly. It's not going to contaminate the environment. And I can't say the same about boards that are manufactured elsewhere in the world, So what is knowing that you have a heart for sustainability, what is the kind of policy with manufacturing there on Oahu? And
so, as you said, exactly. Like the way for us to succeed is for people to see that there's value in a Hawaii built or an American built product outside of the value that they would get from something outsourced, right? And so much of that value comes from the fact that, hey, we are, paying people living wages, right? We wish we could pay them more, but we're paying people like, local people in Kailua, that 90% of the money that comes into us is staying in our local community, right? That we're not, that we have pretty strict environmental regulations that we have to follow as far as stormwater with our dumpster and what we're putting into the air, right? So people, I think, are buying it, as you said, for all of those reasons. And, as so often we talk about environmental policy as being like anti-business, but like, no, like the only way we succeed as a business is based on people having that knowledge. No, I'm buying into this product because I know that they're doing it right. So that's kind of the big picture as far as, how we've existed this long and how we will continue to go forward. And the other part, we certainly need to ensure that, we have the fastest designs and the highest quality all around. Totally. And as far as the rest of our business model, we've been really trying to move into the 6-man canoe market for a while. So all we build is 1-person canoes. We built about 10 or so 6-person canoes over the years. But as far as, just looking at the margin on a product, right, there's like no money to be made with a 1-man canoe, and the margin is much better with a 6-man. So this year we're really hoping to make that transition to 6-mans. And as far as you mentioned export, we do export. Hong Kong is one of our biggest customer bases. They like Hawaii built canoes in Hong Kong. We also ship to a container a year to Australia. We do maybe 20 canoes a year to California or so. So we're we do ship, even though probably 80% of our market is in Hawaii.
Okay. Yeah. Fascinating. Awesome. Well, Luke, where can people find you?
Our Kamanu Composites website, kamanukomposites.com, and all the information is on there.
And as a politician, how do people find you?
You can call me on my cell phone, 808-635-6623. Or I have a campaign website, lukeevslin.com, or on Facebook or any of that.
Awesome.
But hopefully if you're a Kauai person, then the way you can find me is by seeing me out there and coming up to me.
Good. Awesome. Well, thank you for taking so much time.
Yeah, thank you, David. I really appreciate the conversation.
You're welcome.